your preloads come from your human player station. So with that all in mind, how hard do we think that'll be in Teleop to score on the low, or auto to score on the low chamber? 8. I'm hearing 8s mostly. Let's go 8. What about during Teleop? 5.
6.
I'm hearing mostly 6s. Let's go with 6 there. All right, now we're going to the big one, the high chamber in Autonomous. What do we think for that? I'm hearing 8s, 9s, and 10s. Let's go with 9. What about high chamber during Teleop?
6.5.
I'm hearing 7s mostly. Okay, we've got ours for all of those. Now let's move on to endgame. So how hard do we think it's going to be to do ascent level? Mostly 4s. We'll go with 4 then. How about ascent level 3? So this means you must get off the ground and then grab the second bar and pull up above the first bar. We'll go 9 on that one. I hear 9s and 10s. All right, so now we have our breakdown. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug this screen, and we're going to plug in an iPad, and we're going to start with our drawing of our robots. So I'm going to move this out of the way.
iPad 可以直接接这个的，从来没接过 iPad 的。
可以，它有转 HDMI 的，只要有一条线就行。
There's all of our breakdowns here. Also, let me know if you can't hear me while I'm waiting for the mic. I believe I'm loud enough. I'm a very loud person. But so, we have all of our point breakdowns here. So let's go, and I believe there's some options for the view page on here. I probably should have figured out how to do that beforehand. Great. So we're going to start designing our robots. So we have this new board. We did that a little bit. So we have a couple of things that we want to do. So looking at the things we need to break down. How many points is everything worth? And what's the lowest difficulty score that we think is worth it? Thank you. Testing. Great. So which ones of these scores? So we have our parking is 1 point. So or 1 out of 10. So I think that's worth it. Net score. So we should be capable of doing that. What do you think is the maximum score of things that we should go for? Maybe like 5, 6s? You all agree? Give me a thumbs up if that sounds good. Hold up the fingers for the highest difficulty you think your team can do.
10.
I see some ambitious people here. We're going to go with anything that's a 6 or below. We'll do for the first one. Then we'll go up to a higher tier robot, and then maybe with the highest tiers robot will work. So we're going to start with maybe a lower tier. So teams who are newer to FIRST, newer to FTC, maybe in their first, second, or third year, need something easier to start with. I would recommend you all have an easy solution to start off that does a couple of tasks well and then become more complex from there. Because once you can play the game at a basic level, early in the season, consistency is way more important than scoring high. I would project that maybe 40% of matches at League Meet 1 are going to be won by penalties. That's how it was last year. It would not surprise me again. Drive practice is everything. So moving into our actual robots, it seems we have parking, scoring in the net zone, scoring in the low, being able to score in the high in Teleop, being able to climb, sample low, and hang to level 2. So that's a good robot start. So let's go to our new board. And the parking's really easy. You just got to drive in there, right? So we don't really need to talk about that. Oh, that's not a new board. Yep. There we go. All right. So now that we're in here, does anyone have any ideas for how to grab those elements? I would love, yeah. Claw. Claw is a great idea. Anyone have any other ideas? Yeah? Intake, yeah. Those are kind of the two things we see. So those of you who don't know what an intake is, there's a lot of examples. You can kind of see it in some of the videos I showed, where people have things either spinning overhead really fast or on the side spinning inwards to grab things really fast. So there's some examples, yeah. So we got our nice spiky wheel there, and we've got our claw there that closes. So I do apologize, neither of our art skills are very good. I'm making him do it because I actually failed my elementary school art class. True story. So I think that maybe, why don't we hybrid these ideas? What if we made like a claw sort of mechanism that also has wheels so that it could grab things quickly? So if you want to combine those up, draw it up, you can make a new board if you have to. I think you might have to. We can just go back. Yeah, so maybe we make a hybrid like grabbing mechanism in here. That does both, because that might be the best of both worlds, having the maneuverability of a claw and then the active component. Because the problem with claws in games like this is that you have to be exactly right to grab on and pick up, which means that your driver will spend a lot of time trying to align to the thing perfectly and picking it up. So there are teams who have done claws super well. If you want a good example of a claw, let's see, is this team in here? I don't see them. Team 18225's Freight Frenzy robot had a really good claw. So if you want to look up the, oh, they are there. Hello. So their Freight Frenzy robot had a really good claw. If you're going to do a claw, look at that video. That is definitely the way to go. Now, intakes, the perks of intakes are that you can grab things from further away. A lot of the times, like you saw in that Delta Force video, they pretty much just drove in, drove out constantly. When you have active wheels, you can just pick something up really quick. Now, the downside to intakes is that you can't always control what you get. So you might accidentally pick up an opposing alliance piece, and then you have to eject it and grab another one. So it's up to you whether you think the unpredictability of an intake is worth the faster grab times, or if you want to go for a claw. I think a hybrid like this is what I personally would go with, but it's entirely up to you. Again, this is your robots. So now that we have an example of a claw, we need a way to either score it or get with this same arm or get it into our robots. So does anyone have any ideas? What do you think is a good way to get it from our claw into our robot or make it so our claw can also score? I see a hand in the back. Yeah, so I heard a transfer system into a bucket and then linear slides. Why don't we draw this up? This is a good example of things that we've seen in the past, and a good example of what you saw in that gluten-free video, the Team 11115 that we saw from that Rover Ruckus game, which had the big center thing. So they extended out really far, grabbed something, pulled it in, put it in a basket behind them, went up and scored. Now, I would recommend this if you are a team that has a lot of experience. If you are a rookie team, I highly recommend you do not do this. I've seen rookie teams do this. I've only ever seen it go well 2 or 3 times. So, and I've been in FTC for, I think this is year 7 or 8, I'm not sure. So I would highly recommend enough. So if I've only seen 3 successful examples in your rookie year, this is not the mechanism to go with if you're new and don't have robotics experience. Now, another mechanism I would potentially recommend, and here if you are a newer team, is that pivot arm. Because something you can do, since the orientation doesn't really matter unless you're trying to score those clips. I'm going to refer to them as like clips and blocks because I haven't gotten the terminology in my head right yet. But the clips pieces, specimens, that's what they're called. Specimens are going to be harder to score because you have to have them in the exact right orientation to score them. Versus scoring in the baskets, those you don't have to have in any orientation to score. You can kind of just plop them in and you're good. So, when you do that, I would highly recommend, because the difference between a high basket and a high specimen is only 2 points. It's 8 points versus 10. Early season, I would highly recommend you focus on those baskets, because they're going to win you matches. If you spend the whole match trying to get one specimen on there, there's another team just dropping them in the lower high basket, they will beat you almost every time. Now, that's not to say you can avoid specimens for the entire game, because as seasons go on, teams will redesign their entire robots or build new components constantly. Because if you avoid a component, it's not going to go well for you if you continue it. Case in point, my team last year, they thought they'd be great doing the same thing all season long, and then once they got to higher levels, they got passed up. They were a great early season team. Just be really careful and make sure you have plans to iterate and do future tasks. But at the first meet, you do not need to do everything to be successful. So we've got that, I see our rotational arm mechanism drawn on the board. Something where as a claw, it rotates up, reaches back, and then drops. That's a great robot idea for a rookie team or a newer team, and it can be very successful early season and even late season if executed well. I see hand up for another idea. Yeah, that's a great idea. So his idea was intake that attaches to a virtual 4-bar. So a good example of this, it's a claw, but not necessarily an intake, would be 11970 Power Play, as well as, it wasn't a virtual, but a regular 4-bar. I'm going to say 11970 a lot, since that was the team I graduated from. But 11970 Freight Frenzy did the same thing with a regular 4-bar. I'm blanking on any virtual 4-bar intake robots right now. Delta Force, the one we saw, was, I guess that was a pivot arm, not a virtual 4-bar. But yeah, that's a great idea as well. I don't remember. It's been a while since that game. Yeah, so that was an example in the Delta Force video of seeing that intake and then the virtual 4-bar there with the deposit. That's a great idea. So we have designed and closed. Let's see this drawing. Rate the drawing skills here. Yeah, so I see, you've got an intake there attached to a virtual 4-bar on some sort of post. That gets you a lot of height, though I will warn you, when you're doing a rotational arm, I have my cardboard piece here, great. Thank you, Austin, for not listening to me when I said I wouldn't need this. So, we have our cardboard piece here. Let's say I'm our robot. I'm in the middle of this cardboard piece. If I have a rotational arm, that doesn't mean I can reach 42 inches this way and 42 inches this way. It means you can go 21 inches this way and 21 inches that way. So you gotta be really careful about the length of your arm, because if you make it so that you can rotate 42 inches, you can't use the back end of your arm now. So be really careful when you do that. Now remember, you can make your arm capable of doing that and just software limit it. That is up to you how you want to do it, but I would highly recommend you don't do that, and that's selfish on my part because I really don't want to call that in game. So that's a down draw to the rotational arm because you do lose that back end of motion. Now we have these ideas, so let's go up to maybe more of a mid-tier robot now that we've kind of gotten the 2 examples of a lower to mid-tier robot. So let's go back to our scoring objectives here and see which ones are a little bit higher. So we have our high goal here was a 7, so we can say the sample in the high. We have autonomous scoring on the high buckets, and I think that's about all we have to add to this. Does anyone have any ideas for maybe a mechanism that could grab a sample well and score it well? I'd love to hear any ideas. I'm happy to throw some out on my own, but let's see if we have anyone. Give you all a second to think. Yeah, you have an idea? Here, I'll come up to you. I can't hear you. Yeah, compliant wheel intakes. So you want to draw something up. You think it might be in front of the robot or something separate from your main intake. Horizontal. Yeah, and so that might be a good way to do it. Now, the big challenge with specimens here is that you need to make it so that it can go in a specific orientation, because once it's in the robot, you either need to have something like, I believe it was Wolfpack Machina. There was one year, it was Power Play, where they were able to move a cone in any orientation. So it's Team 18438 in Power Play. If you want to see a good way to manipulate mechanisms or game elements inside your robot, they're a very good example. But that is something that's very complicated. So picking it up in a consistent orientation is going to be a lot easier for these samples, or these specimens. How are we doing on time? Almost out of it, okay. So we're gonna rush through this last bit. I thought we had a little bit more time, but that's a good example of that we have up here. Another good example, what I expect to see as our meta design robot this year, I'm gonna skip ahead just a little bit since we're running out of time here, is I expect to see a lot of teams that extend out forward to grab things really far, extend back, and then go straight up from there to score. Because we can't extend backwards, because just because you get the 42 inches, you should use your full 42 inches. And that pit over there is more than 42 inches long. So the further you can reach into that pit, the less you have to drive around it, which means the shorter your cycles are. So I would highly recommend it. Use as much of that extension as you can. Now another thing that I would recommend for specimens, this is my personal idea, if you make your robot a little bit skinnier, like maybe 14 or 13 inches wide rather than the full 18, that clears up 6 or 7 inches on your side. Because that box isn't 2 inches from the side of your robot, it's 20 inches. So however much robot frame you take away is however much room you get on the side. So maybe having a mechanism that with a claw on the side that grabs and lifts up for the specimens might be a good way to get around the problem if you still want to use an intake. So those are, let's draw up a couple of ideas. I know I'm talking a little fast. We only have a couple minutes left, so I wanted to get all of our ideas out on the table. And then if we have any time left before we transition, I would love to get any more input. I do want to do one more plug really quick. Make sure you are doing plenty of drive practice. I know I've said this 3 or 4 times. I've seen teams with pretty average or below average robots place in the top 5 because they've just spent the time on drive practicing. If your question is, hey, do I code an extra scoring element in my auto, or do I spend the next week drive practicing? Drive practice every single time. Because my robot, my last year, I'm going to be honest, it was very average. But we were able to score, when most teams were scoring 10 to 12 game elements, we were able to score 16 to 18 because we spent 6 weeks doing only drive practice. That was pretty much it. We got really, really good at driving our robots. So drive practice is really important. Normally for a schedule, I know we don't have 8 weeks this year, but break down your schedule at the start of the season, figure out how many weeks you're going to spend on each thing, and stick to it as close as possible. What we used to like to do when it was 8 weeks to League One was 4 weeks for engineering, 3 weeks for programming, 1 week for drive practice. Since we only have 6 weeks, I'd probably do 3 weeks engineering, 2 weeks programming, 1 week drive practice. That 1 week is super important. It's okay if you're doing other things while your driver isn't there, but making sure you practice and give them at least a week to get comfortable with the controls so they don't commit penalties is important. You have a question? It's 6 weeks to the start, the first date for League Week 1, I believe. It might be 7, don't quote me on that. I don't remember the dates. What? Yeah, it's gonna vary depending on your event. I'm assuming that I would assume for all of you, you're competing that October 26th weekend until you aren't. Because if you plan to be ready then you will be ready then. And if you get extra time is always valuable.
10月
Yeah,
26
question
号
in the back?
那么早，
啊，
那么早。
早1个月啊，
LM0 is October 4th.
那之前是11月
10月中间
2个礼拜，早2个礼
So if
拜
you。want to sign up for
That's it.
LM0, go and talk to him, get his contact information. This is going to be primarily targeted for newer teams. Older teams are welcome. It's just a great way to get practice out of the way and learn more about the game. I will be there. I will be your head referee for that event. It's also good for me to get calibrated on the rules and what we see often. So if you have any rules questions, you'll come to me there. I have only read through the manual like 1 or 2 times at this point, so I'm not 100% in all the rules, so anything I say here is not going to be 100% confirmed, but if you talk to me at the event, I'll have a better grasp of the rules then. I see a question over here. So LM0 is the event that's run at Woodinville High School every year pre-season for teams to get a chance to play before the season starts. So it's held 4 weeks after kickoff, and it's for teams who are kind of at that time usually just finishing their robot and starting to program to get an example of how to play the game. Now, I would recommend if you're showing this event, don't bother doing auto. I don't think anyone else will. It's way more valuable to get the driver practice and the teleop experience with other robots on the field. Spend the time building your robot and programming your driver control period. You can do the auto in the 3 weeks after that. We've got plenty of time for that. Just focus on driver control if you're coming to that event. Do we have any more questions or ideas that we want to point out here? Because that's about all we have. Our session ended.